All right, and we're back, and today we're going to be interviewing someone very close to me, someone I spend a lot of time working with. Uh, this is Mark. He's from the US, and he's lived in several different countries, and now we work here together in Singapore. So, hey, Mark, welcome to the show.
Good to see you. We're back here at ULC Studios, room 18.
All right, so let's begin. Let's get right to it. Basically, first question is, you're an English teacher now. Why did you decide to become an English teacher? What brought you down this path, this route?
So when I left university, I had studied at a place called Syracuse University, and I was thinking about doing something with media. So my very last year of university, I went and lived in Hollywood. I worked on a zombie TV show that aired on MTV. And during that experience, I realized that I didn't really want to do what I'd spent 4 years studying, which is problematic. Common problem. Common problem. Common problem to have. And that was disconcerting, I would say. And so I moved back home after graduation. I started to apply for jobs half-heartedly, but I didn't really feel like I wanted to do anything in my hometown. And so I spent a good 8 months working for a restaurant called Boston Market, which is a rotisserie chicken fast food place. And during that time, I really couldn't stop thinking about trying something different. And for me, something different meant getting somewhere far away, somewhere very different from the culture, the society I grew up in. And my first idea actually was China. So I applied for China. I got a job in, I think it's Shenzhen. I got a job in Shenzhen, but I realized the pay is terrible and they have a slight pollution problem. So, so after thinking about that for a bit, I changed my mind, took a little bit longer, and finally applied for the JET program, the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, and luckily I got in, and that kind of started my journey teaching abroad and living abroad.
Interesting, nice. And is there a particular reason why you chose Japan?
When I was in middle school, I took my first animation class. And for a couple years when I was a kid, I really wanted to be an animator. I even bought a nice computer so I could do 3D animation. I used to do very novice level 3D sculpting on my computer, like early toys, think of someone trying to make a Toy Story movie, but with a budget of $10 and no skills or abilities. So I really loved animation, and I loved that world that animation could create for you, where there were no boundaries. You could do anything, you could tell any kind of story. So naturally, you can probably see where this is headed. Animation is huge in Japan. So I learned about Ghibli, I learned about Miyazaki and Totoro and all of these different films, and I really fell in love with them. And I took Japanese in university actually for 1 year, and that's also kind of part of that. What was in my brain, it was like, okay, Japanese. I don't like my hometown. Maybe I give it a try while I'm 20 something. I have nothing to lose. So I luckily again I got into the program, packed my bags, and yeah, the nerddom is real with me. So it was a really good fit. It was a really good fit to start me out.
Yeah, perfect. That sounds like a serendipitous moment. You start with anime and then you take Japanese and then those two merge together. That's amazing. All right, so you arrive in Japan. You're an early 20s American guy, probably speak very basic Japanese. So let's talk about what kind of challenges did you face when you first landed in Japan?
Well, the funny thing about Japan, and it does make it easier for new people, is the Japanese in general are extremely polite. So like I was like konnichiwa, and they're like, oh, you speak Japanese. So I already had a big head, and they were fine with telling me that I was awesome, even though I was terrible. And I think even teaching, it was a very easy place for me to dip my toe in the water, because they were very encouraging. And I moved to a city called Kochi. And in Kochi, it's like the rural countryside city of Japan, where there's a city of, I would say, I don't know, I'm going to say 100,000, and there's like 30 white people. Okay. So, I mean, it's one of those things where just by being foreign, you're bringing something to the table. By providing that foreign perspective, by literally speaking something that's not Japanese, you're providing some value. So really the teaching was just something that I was really easy to slowly get into it. The challenges, again, I want to know how detailed you want me to be, but it's usually just cultural things that really affect teachers early on when they move to a completely different country.
Okay, can you maybe expand on that? Like what kind of cultural differences did you experience? Or
Sometimes it's really hard to get to know other teachers. They seem very distant, or their mind is only on teaching. I got almost zero feedback on my teaching for my first 2 years of teaching or something like that. Because they were just, there was a shyness there, or a hesitance to critique me, which actually gets in the way of someone becoming a decent teacher.
yeah, of course.
Yeah, so there was that cultural wall there. And of course, there's a language barrier as well. If you teach in a bigger city, or someplace where there are teachers who have a lot of English experience, then you don't run into this problem. But because I was in a rural area, the countryside, I had some English teachers. So I worked with another teacher. So it wasn't just me starting out, which also was really useful, right? It was tag team teaching with a Japanese teacher who could speak English. But the problem with that is sometimes the Japanese teacher couldn't speak English very well. So they're teaching English, but their level is like pre-intermediate, intermediate for our students. Wow. Yeah. So that also creates problems where for example, the teacher might teach something and I'm like, maybe that's wrong.
And you weren't able to express that, I guess, because they're more senior than you?
It depends on the situation, but especially when you first begin working with another teacher, it's better to, on the sidelines, give them that advice. Some teachers I'd been working with for 2 years, something like that. Of course, you have the rapport, and you can give suggestions, you can critique a bit. Maybe during break time, I'd be like, by the way, I'm not sure about this, right? This pronunciation, right? You said apple, I think you meant apple, So just really funny little things there.
Okay, interesting. And then how long did you spend in Japan in total?
3 years total.
Okay. And then after that, what brought you here? What brought you to Singapore?
Well, first, the reason I stopped after 3 years is I found a trend in my life where after about 2 or 3 years, you get super comfortable whatever you're doing. If you teach English for 3 years in one place, you start to get very comfortable. You know the material. You don't have to think about it too much. And it starts to become kind of a...
monotonous.
Monotonous, yeah. It becomes monotonous. It becomes a bit tedious. So I was dating a girl at the time in Japan. She's not Japanese, she's Singaporean, which you can see where this is going. She also was ready to leave Japan. She wanted to restart her life in Singapore and get out of teaching. And so for me, I moved back to the US for a couple months, reconnected with my parents, went to Yosemite to do a little bit of American tourism, and then I decided to follow that girlfriend, now wife, to Singapore to see if I could find another career in Singapore that also would give me some fulfillment.
Wow. All right. So that's like a double serendipity, right? You had the Japanese anime thing, and then you go to Japan, and then you meet this girl, and then you end up in Singapore. That's really cool. Did you ever have anyone or anything? I know you said the first 2 years you didn't get any feedback, you didn't get any real training or anything like that. But was there anyone or anything that inspired you to keep teaching or keep going? Or it doesn't have to be teaching English, but just being a teacher in general. Is there anything that kept you along that path?
I think, well, for Japan, one of the things that kept me going is just the kids were very, very curious and open to learn. And I know it's kind of funny and it's a bit, what would you call it, narcissistic, but anytime you go into a Japanese classroom with a bunch of 9-year-olds or 8-year-olds, at least in the countryside, it's almost like I'm Tom Cruise walking into the school. Students will literally turn their heads, their eyes go wide, they smile. It's kind of surreal.
Yeah. Mark Sensei, Mark Sensei.
And like, of course, when I was growing up in high school, university, there was nobody being like, that's Mark Schenker. Nobody gave a damn who I was. And then suddenly, anywhere I go, especially academically, of course, I mean, it does happen in the grocery store too, where people are like, but
especially in the small towns.
Especially in a small town, in the school system, it was just really cool to finally feel like I was contributing in a larger way to a group of people. And it was the first time I felt like truly unique.
Well, I think the superstar syndrome is totally real.
Totally
for
real,
English
right?
teachers,
Yeah.
right? That happens here in Singapore. I'm assuming that would happen in China and these other places where, we are the minority, and it's something that, especially 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 8 years ago, maybe now that's slightly different, but yeah, that's definitely a real thing.
And I know it, and it's something like, actually you have to learn as a teacher to, I've evolved as a teacher, but definitely one of the draws of teaching early on was, I've just always loved acting and performing, and teaching, there's one of those things where you have a whole group of people who are counting on you, and you're kind of leading them. And that's part of what I got in Japan that drew me to teaching, and that's kept me going, is, that kind of sense.
Yeah, I agree. I was a waiter for a few years, and I think like that's kind of the perfect job, especially being a waiter in Canada or US, because you have to, be this different persona, right? And you get these people are, hanging on your every word, and I think that's a really cool experience.
Yeah, and I know we do call it edutainment sometimes, where, I mean, teachers, of course, we're teaching you the language and we're doing all these other things, but we need to entertain you in a way. We need to make sure that you feel welcome and connected, and that you can connect with whatever we're teaching. And that's part of the performing arts. Yeah, even if we sometimes don't connect it in the same way.
Right, that's great. All right, so I got one more question for you. There's probably a new teacher out there listening to this, hopefully. And what advice would you give to them if they wanted to move abroad to become an ESL teacher? What's that one thing that they should do before they embark on this journey?
I would say ideally figure out what you want to teach, and what age group especially you want to teach in before you leave and go abroad. Because teaching 7-year-olds, teaching 12-year-olds, teaching adults, teaching the elderly, it's a different vibe. There's a very different feeling for all of those. And I had to spend a decent amount of time just trying to figure out where I fit. And I know that comes with experience. I was lucky to be able to teach 2 of those groups, right? Elementary and middle school, whenever I was in Japan. And then I taught middle school, and I've taught adults mostly in Singapore. But any kind of cues you can get into what level you like to teach, what age you like to teach, I think that can really help you in fast tracking where you eventually get to. Even before I went to Japan, I volunteered teaching English as a second language at some volunteer group in Pittsburgh. And that's where I, again, kind of got a taste of it. Because it would be terrible if you moved to another country and you're like, oh, I really, really hate teaching. And I really, really hate kids. That can be a very painful year for you if you go in without any experience at all. So there are ample opportunities to teach and help others in your own community. So start practicing there. And then the only other thing is just make sure you kind of think about or research what environment you're getting into. If you teach in rural Vietnam, Singapore, Tokyo, those are very, very, very different experiences. Very different things are going to happen to you in your life. The language barriers are going to be different in each situation. So just kind of have some idea of what you're jumping into before you go. I know for Matt, we just talked about maybe you didn't have as much of a foundation before jumping in, but I recommend that for anybody who's a little bit more cautious like myself.
That is very, very sage advice, Mark. Thank you. So that's all the time we have for that today. Why don't you tell the listeners where they can learn more about you or where they can find you on all the socials and the interwebs?
Yeah, so of course, Matt and I, we have Teachers Mark and Matt at YouTube, right? So if you go on YouTube, you can find us there. We also have Teachers Mark and Matt on Facebook, on TikTok, and then I do have a special Teacher Mark ULC. That's my current Twitter handle. So if you want more, that one's more Japanese English-based content. You can also find me on Twitter, Teacher Mark ULC.
That's great. So look up Mark and Matt, and we look forward to seeing you guys on the next podcast. Have a good day.